In the vast, unforgiving desert, where the sand stretches endlessly under a burning sun, a lone figure stood tall. The warrior, an alien of extraordinary skill, adjusted her grip on the hilt of her gleaming blade. Her armor, adorned with fur and intricate markings, reflected the sunlight, giving her an almost ethereal aura. She was a warrior unlike any other, trained from birth to be a symbol of power and strength. The blade in her hand had cut through countless enemies. None had been able to withstand her might. But today, she was facing an opponent who seemed different from all the others. Across from her stood a human, a man dressed in simple, weathered clothes, with no armor to protect him, no weapon beyond his own resolve. His eyes locked with hers, unwavering and calm, as if he knew something she didn't. The wind stirred the sand around them, and the silence of the desert felt suffocating. The warrior's pulse quickened. She had faced many opponents before, but none with this presence, this unshakable confidence. This human had been captured, brought to her as a prisoner to be dealt with, but she never expected a fight like this. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her blade raised high. "You are not worthy of my time," she said, her voice cold but filled with authority. "Prepare to face your end." Without a word, the man didn't flinch. His face remained calm, almost serene. He stood tall, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet strength, an unspoken challenge. It was as though he didn't fear her, didn't fear death. And that alone made the warrior uneasy. She was accustomed to fear. She had caused it in her enemies, and it had always been the key to victory. But this human didn't seem to know what fear was. With a quick movement, the warrior lunged forward, her blade slicing through the air. She aimed directly for his heart, a strike she had perfected over years of training. But to her shock, the blade met something solid and unyielding. It wasn't flesh, it wasn't bone. It was as though the blade had struck metal. The force of her blow sent vibrations through her arm, but the human didn't even stagger. His eyes never left hers. The warrior stepped back, her breath coming quicker now, confusion creeping into her mind. She had struck with all her power, yet he was untouched. He didn't even react. Was he wearing armor? Impossible. She could see his bare skin, unprotected. But somehow, the blade hadn't even left a scratch. She swung again, this time with all her might. Her muscles, honed by years of combat, pushed her blade forward with an unmatched force. But once again, the blade struck and rebounded, as though it had collided with an impenetrable wall. This wasn't just any human. This wasn't a normal opponent. The warrior's heart raced as she stared at the man in front of her. What kind of human was this? How could he withstand her blade? The human shifted his weight slightly, his stance unbothered, and yet there was something in the way he held himself, like he was not just physically strong, but mentally unbreakable. The warrior felt a strange pressure in the air, an invisible weight, pressing down on her shoulders. The desert sun felt hotter now, as if it too was watching this strange confrontation. "Is that all you've got?" The human's voice broke the silence, his tone casual, almost mocking. He didn't seem to be in any rush. He wasn't even breathing hard. It was as if he was simply waiting for her to tire herself out. His calmness unnerved her more than any weapon could. The warrior narrowed her eyes, determined not to show weakness. She had faced fearsome enemies before, but none like this. None who seemed impervious to her attacks. She stepped back, assessing him. What was happening? Was there something she didn't understand? The stories she had heard about humans, the fear they inspired across the galaxy, suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. Perhaps they weren't just weak and fragile. Perhaps there was more to them than she had ever imagined. She steadied her breathing, gripping her blade tighter. She couldn't let doubt enter her mind. She couldn't show fear. This human was a challenge, but she would break him, as she had broken every other foe before him. With a swift motion, she lunged again, this time aiming for his side, a move she knew he wouldn't expect. But again, the same result. Her blade barely touched him. and he didn't even move. It was as if he had no vulnerability at all. The warrior's confidence began to waver. What was going on? The human's calmness was maddening. There had to be a trick. There had to be some weakness. She just needed to find it. The wind picked up again, swirling sand around them, but the man didn't even flinch. His gaze remained steady, unwavering, as though he were daring her to try again. And try again, she did. But the more she struck, the more she realized that her blade, her most trusted weapon, was useless against him. She had never been in a fight like this, never faced an opponent who seemed so indestructible. As she stepped back for a moment to catch her breath, her thoughts raced. The human stood there, watching her, completely unscathed. The warrior could feel something stirring deep inside her, a strange mix of confusion and fear. For the first time, she wasn't sure of the outcome of this fight. The realization began to dawn on her. Perhaps this human wasn't the weakling she had expected. Perhaps he was something else entirely. The desert, once so silent, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Would she continue to fight, or was this the moment when everything changed? The warrior's mind was spinning, and in that moment, she realized something that terrified her more than any blade ever could. She was afraid, and she didn't know how to fight this fear. The warrior stood in the desert, her blade still tightly gripped in her hand, her body covered in sweat. She had paused momentarily, trying to regain her bearings. Her breathing was heavy, and her heart raced in her chest. She had never felt this way before. Confused, uncertain, vulnerable. The human before her stood unscathed, as though her every strike had meant nothing. It wasn't just that her blade had failed to pierce him. It was the way he stood, the calm in his eyes, the absence of fear. The warrior's mind was spinning. She had fought countless battles, but none had ever been like this. None had ever forced her to question everything she thought she knew about strength and power. She had always believed that her species was the pinnacle of warrior culture, that their skills, their weapons, their abilities would always ensure victory. But now, standing before this human, she wasn't so sure. She swung her blade once more, aiming for his side. But just like the others, the strike didn't land. It felt as though it simply passed through him, as if he were a ghost. This wasn't possible. He was human, fragile, weak, just like all the other stories she had heard about their species. They were not warriors. They were not meant to be able to withstand this. Yet, here he was. The human didn't move, didn't flinch. He didn't even make a sound as her blade whizzed through the air. He was completely unaffected. The warrior's frustration grew, but so did something else, something she couldn't quite place. A quiet panic began to stir deep within her. What was she missing? She took a step back, staring at him as her thoughts raced. She studied him closely. His skin wasn't armored. There were no strange technologies embedded in him. No, this was just a man, a human being. He wasn't like the others she had fought. There were no hidden tricks or weaknesses she could exploit. She had been trained to find those, to hunt them down and use them to her advantage. But there was nothing here. Just this human, standing tall, unyielding, and unnervingly calm. "Why don't you speak?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Why do you remain so still? Are you afraid to fight?" The human didn't answer her right away. Instead, he simply took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The warrior's heart skipped a beat, a chill running down her spine. There was something about the way he moved, so measured, so deliberate. There was no aggression in his steps, no anticipation of a blow. He wasn't looking for an opening. He was simply there. "I fought for survival all my life," he said, his voice low and calm, as if speaking to a child. "But I don't fight for power. I don't fight to dominate. I fight because it's all I know." The warrior blinked, his words sinking in. There was no arrogance in his tone, no smugness. He wasn't taunting her. He was simply stating a fact. He wasn't a conqueror. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. The warrior couldn't help but feel the weight of his words settle in her chest. There was something about this human, this man, that was different from the stories she had heard. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The warrior stood still, her blade lowering slightly. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else, something deeper. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Had she misjudged everything? Was her species truly superior? Had they really been the ultimate warriors all this time? Or had they simply believed it because they had never faced someone like this human? The human continued to approach, his presence steady, unwavering. And despite herself, despite all the pride she had in her strength and her species, the warrior found herself hesitating. Was this truly how it ended? With her, the greatest warrior of her people, facing an opponent who couldn't be defeated by strength alone. "You're not what I expected," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. The human stopped a few paces in front of her, his eyes locking with hers. There was no arrogance there, no smugness, just a quiet understanding that sent a shiver through the warrior's bones. "None of us are what you expect," he said. "We're capable of things you can't imagine, things you've never seen before." The warrior felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew what he meant. It wasn't the strength of her blade or the power of her attacks that mattered anymore. It was something deeper, something innate to him. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. This human, this species, had something she couldn't touch, couldn't understand. The power of the human spirit was something her species had never truly comprehended. They had always relied on weapons, strength, and sheer force. But the human, this man standing before her, was a testament to something else, something far more powerful than her blade. He was a living embodiment of survival, of resilience. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about the will to endure, to keep fighting when all hope seemed lost. The warrior's hands trembled slightly as she lowered her blade fully, the weight of the realization pressing down on her shoulders. She had been so sure of her superiority, so sure of the invincibility of her people. But now, faced with this human, she was starting to understand the truth. The strength of her species wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. "I'm not like you," the warrior said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The human nodded, his expression softening. "No, you're not. But you don't have to be. We can both learn from each other." The warrior took a step back, her thoughts still swirling. She was terrified, but not of him. She was terrified of what this realization meant. She had been wrong, and that was something she had never had to face before. How could she have been so blind to the true power of humanity? How could she have thought that strength was all there was? The human's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, the warrior truly understood. She wasn't just fighting the human, she was fighting her own ignorance. And in that moment, she realized she had much more to learn than she ever could have imagined. The desert sun seemed to beat down harder now, its heat pressing in on the warrior from all sides, mirroring the heavy realization that had taken root in her mind. She had always believed that power was something you could see, something tangible you could measure. Her blade, her strength, her species' warrior culture, they had all been enough to bring down any foe. But here, standing before her, was a human who had shown her that her understanding of power was flawed. And that truth, the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, her species was not as invincible as she had thought, began to erode the confidence she had once held so dearly. The warrior took a step back, her mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. Anger, confusion, doubt, and deep, deep fear. It was a fear she had never known, a fear that had nothing to do with the strength of her opponents or the size of their armies. It was a fear that came from the very core of her being, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being weak. She could feel her grip on her blade tightening, her knuckles turning white, but there was no comfort in the familiar weight of it now. The weapon she had always relied on, her most trusted ally, felt like nothing more than a heavy burden. a symbol of her past, one that no longer seemed capable of offering the power it once had. The human didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, watching her, his gaze steady and unwavering. His calmness in the face of her growing panic only deepened her sense of helplessness. She was supposed to be the one in control. She was supposed to be the one who struck fear into the hearts of others. And yet, here she was, trembling before a human who seemed entirely unaffected by her strength. "Why?" she whispered, barely able to control the tremor in her voice. "Why aren't you afraid?" The human's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing through them. "Fear doesn't control me," he said quietly. "I fight because I have to, not because I want to. You're different. You fight because it's who you are. It's your identity." The warrior's heart pounded in her chest. His words rang in her ears, but they made no sense. She had always fought to prove herself, to show the world, and herself, that she was the strongest, that no one, no thing, could ever match her. But now, as she looked into the human's eyes, she realized how wrong she had been. It wasn't her strength that defined her. It wasn't the blade in her hand or the scars on her skin. It was her ability to adapt, to learn, to grow. And in that moment, the warrior realized that her species had been too focused on the wrong kind of strength. They had been obsessed with physical power, with domination, with taking what they wanted. But true strength, she understood now, came from within. It was the ability to face fear, to confront the unknown, and still stand tall. Her mind flashed back to all the battles she had fought, all the enemies she had defeated. Each victory had been a testament to her power, but none of those victories had made her feel the way she did now. None of them had left her with the hollow, sickening feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had never been afraid until now. And that fear, deep, primal, and overwhelming, was threatening to consume her. For the first time, she wondered if her species' way of fighting had made them weak. All the bloodshed, all the destruction, it had never been enough. And now, here was a human who had no armor, no weapon, and no need to fight unless it was necessary. And yet, despite all that, he was the one who stood unshaken. The warrior's legs felt weak beneath her. She swayed slightly, as though her own body couldn't keep up with the chaos that was happening in her mind. She had always thought herself invincible, but now, the truth seemed to be falling apart around her. She was beginning to understand that her fear wasn't just about losing a battle. It was about losing her identity, losing everything she had built her life upon. Her thoughts raced as she tried to steady herself. "I've always been stronger than them," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I've always fought for my people, to protect them, to show them that we are the greatest." The human didn't respond immediately. He simply stepped forward, slowly, as if sensing the turmoil within her. He wasn't here to fight her anymore. He wasn't here to challenge her strength. Instead, he was offering something that terrified her more than any weapon could. "Strength isn't about how many you defeat," he said softly. "It's about how you rise when you fall, how you change when you learn. You've been fighting for so long, but it's only been one kind of fight. The fight to prove you're the strongest. But there's more to life than that." The warrior closed her eyes, trying to shut out his words, but they lingered in her mind like a poison, seeping into the cracks of her once unshakable confidence. She had spent her whole life building walls around herself, convincing herself that power was all that mattered. But now those walls were crumbling. She could feel the foundation of everything she believed in shaking. She had always believed that fear was something to conquer, something to control. But now she saw that fear was inevitable. It was part of being alive. It was part of being human. And it was that very fear that made humans strong, that allowed them to endure, to grow, to evolve. The warrior took another step back, her eyes darting to the horizon. The world around her seemed to blur as the weight of her realization pressed down on her shoulders. She was afraid, not of the human standing before her, but of what he represented. A species that could survive without relying on brute strength. A species that could face fear without being consumed by it. For the first time, The warrior understood what true power was, and it terrified her. The human watched her, his expression unchanged, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't mocking her. He was simply waiting for her to see what he had already realized. "You can fight to prove you're the strongest," he said quietly, "or you can fight to understand what it really means to be strong." The warrior's mind raced. Her fear had taken hold, but now something else was rising within her. Something new. Something that wasn't based on physical strength or dominance, but on acceptance. Acceptance that she could change. That she didn't have to be the strongest to be powerful. As the desert wind howled around them, the warrior's fear began to give way to something else. A small tentative spark of hope. The wind howled around them, swirling the golden sand into the air, carrying with it the echoes of the desert's ancient stories. The warrior's thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, doubt, and confusion. But beneath it all, something else stirred. A flicker of curiosity, a glimmer of hope. She had spent so much of her life believing in one way of fighting, one way of thinking, that she had never truly considered another path. But here, standing before this human, she could feel that something was shifting within her. She took a deep breath, her grip on her blade loosening as she lowered it slightly. The weight of the weapon in her hand felt different now, no longer the symbol of her invincibility, but a reminder of the battle she had fought, not just against this human, but against herself. She had always believed that strength came from the blade, from sheer force, from the power to dominate. But now she was beginning to understand that true strength came from something far deeper. The human stood before her, waiting, his eyes calm but filled with understanding. He hadn't raised a weapon against her, hadn't attacked once. He had simply offered his words, his presence, and in doing so, he had shaken the very foundation of what she had believed about herself. There was no smugness in his expression, no hint of triumph. He wasn't here to prove that humans were better or stronger. He was here to offer something far more valuable: understanding. "You're right," the warrior said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes dropped to the sand beneath her feet, the weight of her admission heavy on her shoulders. "I've been fighting for the wrong reasons. I've been fighting to prove myself. But now I see. I see that I've been afraid of what it means to change." The human nodded, his expression warm, but not patronizing. "Change is hard," he said, his voice gentle. "It's not about being afraid of it, though. It's about embracing it. It's about growing, even when it feels like everything you've known is falling apart." The warrior raised her head, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a reflection of herself, a reflection of someone who had struggled, who had fought, and who was now standing at the edge of something new. Something she didn't yet fully understand, but something that felt right. "I've spent my whole life thinking that power was about domination," she said, the words flowing more freely now. "I thought strength was about being unbreakable, about never showing weakness. But now I realize that true strength isn't about how much you can destroy. It's about how much you can build. It's about how you rise when everything falls apart. It's about having the courage to face your fears and move forward, even when the world around you seems uncertain." The human smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Exactly. Strength isn't about being unyielding in the face of everything. It's about being flexible enough to bend, to grow, to learn. It's about understanding that we don't have to fight everything. We just need to know when to fight, when to stand our ground, and when to let go." The warrior felt something within her shift, a weight lifting off her chest as the truth of his words sank in. She had always defined herself by her ability to fight, to conquer, to control. But now, standing here in the desert with this human, she saw that her definition of strength had been too narrow. Strength was not just about power and domination. It was about resilience, understanding, and most importantly, the ability to change when the world demanded it. She looked around the barren desert, the endless stretch of sand seeming to reflect the vastness of the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her past decisions and beliefs lift, replaced by a sense of possibility. There was so much more to learn, so much more to experience, and she realized that she didn't have to do it alone. With a deep breath, the warrior lowered her blade completely and stepped forward, closing the distance between her and the human. She held out her hand, not in defeat, but in mutual respect. "I've been wrong," she said, her voice steady now. "But I'm willing to learn. I want to understand. I want to see the world in a different way." The human paused for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if weighing her words. Then, without hesitation, he took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "We all start somewhere," he said. "And it's never too late to change, to grow." The warrior felt a rush of warmth, not from the sun above, but from the connection between them. It wasn't just a victory for the human. It was a victory for both of them. A victory that transcended strength, power, or weapons. It was the victory of understanding, of breaking down the walls that had defined their worlds, and finding a common ground. As they stood there, hand in hand, the desert no longer seemed so vast or empty. The warrior felt a new sense of purpose filling her chest. She didn't need to prove her strength through battle anymore. She had proven it in her willingness to change, to face her own fears, and to step into the unknown. The human nodded, as if acknowledging the shift in her, the transformation that had taken place. "Together, we can face whatever comes next," he said. "But we don't have to do it through fear or force. We can do it with courage, understanding, and the willingness to see the world as it is, rather than as we want it to be." And with that, the warrior smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in a long time. She had spent her life thinking she had to fight alone. That strength was something you held inside, something to protect. But now she knew that true strength came from the ability to open up, to trust, and to walk forward together. The world was full of challenges, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them, not with fear, but with hope. As the sun set behind them, casting a soft, golden light over the vast desert, the warrior and the human stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Together.